Cath Baxter is a voice coach, which, do you know, I don't know if I have the opportunity to actually have a session, but I'm sitting here ready with my pen poised to take lots of notes, because this is an area, if I'm honest with you, I have struggled. I'm pretty good face to face. It's taken me 6 months, I think, to become camera friendly and get used to all the bits and pieces. You've seen Cath's biography, but I just want to highlight the bits that I thought were really interesting. So Cath's whole focus is greater impact in communications, but she's worked with the civil service, the NHS, Raylan Road, DVLA, Independent Office for Police Conduct, Scottish Government, and so on, the MOD and so on. And it just made me think that sometimes when we see some of these colleagues and professionals, we just think they've naturally got it, but actually they've taken training, and we need to invest in that too. So Cath, thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to your session. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Anita. Can I just do a check that we can all hear and see me clearly? Kieran, I wonder if you could just give me a thumbs up on that. Anita, can you hear and see me clearly? Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Please, good afternoon. Please allow me to introduce myself to you. My name is Cath Baxter, and I am a professional voice and impact coach. And I would like to welcome you this session, which is entitled Maximising Your Impact in Online Communications. Now, I've been working for Women into Leadership and leading these seminars for around about the last 4 years. And if you had said to me in January that we would be leading a session about online communication, I would have said, yeah, that's probably a good idea at some point in the future, but I'm not sure that that is a priority at this moment in time for women who are looking to develop their leadership skills. Of course, forward fast, 3 months, and suddenly I'm sure you, like me, were scrabbling around Zoom tutorials going, oh my word, how am I going to transfer my entire teaching practice or my entire classroom experience into an online environment? And that's what I want to share with you today. I want to share with you some best practice in terms of creating impact within an online communication. And, you know, I suppose I want to be pragmatic, and I want to be clear with you, is that there are many scenarios when we're working in education, and as somebody who worked in higher education for 14 years, there are plenty of meetings that I've attended. There are plenty of scenarios where you are not able to feel or being aware of your impact in terms of your communication. Or because we're working in an education environment, sometimes the stakes feel lower and we're just having a conversation. What I'm going to share with you today is not for those scenarios where you perceive that the stakes are low and people are just having a coffee and a catch up in terms of the direction of travel for this week's teaching. It's for when those meetings are important, when you want to create impact, when perhaps you are meeting a new cohort of students for the first time, when you're looking to influence the senior stakeholders within your organization to move towards a change of direction, when you're looking to interview, because so many interviews over the next 6 months will be within this environment. And what I want to do and share with you all today is some best practice in terms of doing that. And so what I want to start with is I want to start by checking in with all of you. So many of you have been communicating, as Anita identified, over the last 6 months within an online environment. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to Kieran, and Kieran's going to take you through a Slido set of questions that I've got, because I'm curious as to the positive impact that you've experienced of working within an online environment, and also the challenges that you've experienced in terms of communicating in an online environment. So my question here is, what are the positives of communicating in an online environment? What have you recognized are the advantages? And just perhaps a couple of words. Is it, you know, that you can wear your pajamas from the waist down? Is it that you don't have to commute? You know, what are the positives in terms of being able to deliver sessions? Is it the fact that you can still share your screens? Have a little think and just take a moment to reflect on your experience of communicating in an online environment and the positives within that. Breakout rooms, absolutely. Love using breakout rooms. Accessibility of colleagues, being able to communicate one-to-one, being able to get in touch with colleagues. Absolutely. I think there's a real interesting where everybody in the space is in the same side screen, whether that's the principal of your organization or the CEO or the individual who's most junior within the organization. And indeed, it really does give some flexibility. Thank you so much for sharing those observations. Let's move on to the second question. And that's around, of course, challenges of working within an online environment. What have you, and I'm really curious about this, what have you found challenging about communicating within an online environment? Zoom fatigue. Absolutely, reading the room. And I want to pick up on some of these things as we go through the session. Keeping people engaged, absolutely. Seeing ourselves on screen, absolutely. All of these things are a real issue. Wi-Fi issues, loneliness, maintaining concentration. I think, too much work online can be a real issue. Non-verbals, absolutely, really difficult in an online environment to be picking up on non-verbals and to become aware of our own non-verbal communication. And so now what I'm going to share with you is I'm just going to ask you a question around what is it that you guys pay attention to when you come into an online environment? What is it that you notice when you come into an online environment? So we've got a little poll here. Are you aware of the appearance, the person who you're communicating to, what your colleagues are wearing, whether they've, not put any makeup on, done their hair? Are you aware of the background, where it is that they are as they're delivering their messages? Are you noticing eye contact, if somebody's looking at you or not? Are you looking at somebody's posture, how it is that they're delivering their messages? Do you pay any attention to whether the camera's on or off? Do you make any assumptions in relation to that? So just taking the opportunity to reflect on, and feel free to choose more than one if you're able to do that, but what is it that you often notice when someone joins an online call? And I think that these results are very, very telling indeed. 60% of you notice the background when somebody comes onto the screen within an online environment. And I think that's really, really interesting and really telling. Kieran, if you would just allow me to come back, I think we've explored that.
Sure, Cath.
Fantastic. Now, what I want to say is I ran a similar seminar at the beginning of July for a group of women who are working and looking to develop their leadership skills working within the NHS. And when I asked a similar question about background, 93% of the participants were curious about the background. And we're looking at the world now through this single lens camera. And this is giving us a lot of information. So background and setup are some of the things that we're going to be exploring in terms of enhancing your impact within an online environment. So what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to share my screen with you because I want to talk you through what it is that we're going to be looking at in today's session. So in today's training, we are going to be looking at exploring 9 deliberate actions that you can take in order to enhance your impact online, but also these actions can apply in a face-to-face environment. I'm going to be talking about how you can speak so that other people pay attention. We're going to be looking at how you can present your ideas online or at interview with gravitas and with confidence. And we're going to be also looking at strategies around asking questions and interjecting and responding to interruption with authority. So there's a wide range of issues that we're going to be looking at within the context of this training session today. So, who is this Scottish woman who is speaking to you? Now, we're on the internet, so I could be from around these parts, but actually I'm coming live from my home in Surbiton, which is just outside of London. As you can hear, I don't originally come from Surbiton. I'm actually from Aberdeen. Now, I believe it's possible that we might have some participants from Aberdeen University here today. So I'm just going to say big up to those who are in Aberdeen, and hello and fit like and all that sort of thing to my fellow Aberdonians. And for the rest of you, I apologise for just not being able to be entirely clear as I went into my Aberdonian accent. So I'm originally from Aberdeen. I trained as an actor when I was 17 years old at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, and then retrained and did an MA in voice studies at Central School of Speech and Drama in London 18 years ago. So I'm now actually an adult. I've finally come of age. And for 14 of those years, I worked in higher education. I was head of discipline, head of voice at Mount View Academy of Theatre Arts, which is one of the top 5 drama schools in the country, and is affiliated, and the degrees are awarded by the University of East Anglia. So I've consistently worked within a higher education environment, but I've also worked in a wide range of education settings, from primary to secondary to community work. So I really do understand some of the demands that we face in terms of communicating in those diverse range of settings. So whether that's about speaking up and increasing your visibility, or whether that's just managing vocal fatigue because of consistent classroom teaching, or because you're now having to communicate in this online environment, I'm here today to be able to answer any questions that you might have about using your voice, using your physicality, using your words in order to create influence and impact with any of your communications, online or otherwise. So this training session is designed to be around about 40 minutes. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking you through these 9 deliberate actions. There is a PowerPoint, although I'll only be limiting how much I share of that PowerPoint. I'll be going through around about 11 slides with you. And most of the time you're going to see me just discussing those slides to you. And then there will be an opportunity for questions afterwards. And at the very, very end of the presentation, as you all know, we're working in this online environment. I may just share with you my backstage. So stay tuned for that towards the end of the session. So the truth of the matter is that we only have 3 tools in an online environment in order to be able to communicate our messages. We have our words, the words that we choose to say. We've got the voice in which we deliver those messages, and we've got the physicality and how you present those messages. And most of us speak around about 125 words per minute, but we think at 1,200 to 1,400 words per minute. Now, as teachers and academics, you completely understand that. You start talking and your brain starts going, are they listening to me? Are they paying attention? Did I say the right thing? What's going on? What's Jimmy doing over there? Why is that student not taking notes? All of those things are happening. And sometimes that thinking can undermine our impact in terms of our communication. And so that's because I've identified over the course of my career that there are 3 types of communication. There's unconscious communication. And that's where you're just motivated by the situation, the need or want. A lot of our conversations within an academic environment can be unconscious. Can you do this? Can you get this from me? Will you sit down? What's going on? It's not thinking about how you're saying it. But for example, when you're looking to put your ideas across to senior stakeholders, when you're being interviewed, when you recognize that the stakes have risen, we can start to get self-conscious communication. And that's where you perceive that the stakes have risen. And those 1,200 to 1,400 words can undermine your impact. And what we want to be moving towards is something that I share with my clients and my stakeholders. And basically my practice I call conscious communication. Now that's a series of deliberate actions that you take that you know that are going to increase your impact in terms of your communication, as opposed to undermine your impact in terms of communication. Now, ladies, I thought long and hard about calling my practice conscious communication because I am a pragmatic Scottish woman. When I think about conscious communication, I think about some Californian guru going, yeah, we need to be like so mindful about how we deliver our messages. And it's like, that is not my cup of tea. What I want to share with you today are 9 things that you can do that will increase your impact, that will help you to become more visible, that when you know that you want to put your ideas across, that if you take some of these steps, even 1, 2 of these steps, you will feel more confident in your communications, both online and in face-to-face. So the first thing that I'm going to be talking around is around verbal communication, not what you're saying, but how you can enhance how you're saying it. And this first type comes around the issue of saying less, saying less. Now, in a classroom environment, we know that we have been told over the course of our careers that we need to say less, teach less within a classroom environment. My first lesson plans when I was 21 years old, I would have a 2-page A4 full of games and exercises that I was going to teach. And by my last year of teaching in higher education, most of the time I would walk into a classroom, I would just have 1 thing or 2 key things that I was going to teach. But the same is true in terms of communication. And this quote from Thomas Jefferson, I feel really resonates. The most valuable of all talents is that of never using 2 words when 1 will do. We don't just have to teach less. Often, if we're wanting to create impact, we need to speak less too. We need to use less words. We need to declutter our message. Now, you might say, well, that's easier said than done. How can I achieve that? And you can achieve that by learning how to pause, to think before you speak. Now, what I want to assure you all is that nobody wakes up one morning going, yeah, I know how to pause. I know how to take a little moment. But there are some real advantages to learning how to pause. As a voice coach, one of the things that I get asked more regularly than any other question is how can I slow down my rate of speech? I'm told that I speak too quickly. And most people, if you were to tell a colleague or a client, hey, you need to slow down, our brain then goes, well, how do you want me to speak then? It's like you start speaking in slow motion. But if you learn how to pause and you punctuate your sentences with pauses as I'm doing now, it literally slows down your rate of speech. The other thing that pausing does is it gives the person who you're talking to literally time to process what you're saying. We can't process too much information at any one time. So if you punctuate your sentences with pauses, it allows the other person to process it. The other thing that pausing does is when you take a pause, you give your 1,200 to 1,400 words time to think about what it is that you want to say. You allow them to process, and as a result, what comes after the pause can allow you to say less words. And finally, in an interview situation, pausing indicates that you're somebody who's in control. Because in an interview situation, for example, we experience a lot of adrenaline. And so if the adrenaline picks up, if you're able to pause, what it reads like to the other person is that you can manage your adrenaline. Now, most of the time it reads like I can manage my adrenaline because I'm able to pause. I experience adrenaline just like everybody else. I've got the old shaky hands today. I'm not going to be picking up objects today because I experience adrenaline and it affects me in my hands. But what I can do, and I have practiced and I am able to control, is the ability to pause. And that can create some real impact. But ladies, what I want to share with you now is I want to share with you a little video of Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. And it's a video of him taking a pause before answering a really contentious question about Donald Trump. And there are some excellent things to steal from how he takes this pause. The first 5 seconds of it are brilliant. When he's asked the question, in terms of best practice, look at how he's breathing. He breathes in and he breathes out as he's being asked the question. And he holds his composure for the first 5 seconds as he's allowing his 1,200 to 1,400 words to think about what he's doing. But then he starts to leak. He starts, oh, there's a little sigh. You can see, and then eventually he finds the words. I'm not suggesting that you take this length of a pause, but it is a good example in terms of if you give yourself enough time, the good words will come. So here is Justin Trudeau and this little video. Let me just take that back.
Hi, Prime Minister Tom Perry, CBC. You've been reluctant to comment on the words and actions of the U.S. president, but we do have Donald Trump now calling for military action against protesters. We saw protesters tear gas yesterday to make way for a presidential photo op. I'd like to ask you what you think about that, and if you don't want to comment, what message do you think you're sending?
We all watch in horror and consternation what's going on in the United States. It is a time to pull people together, but it is a time to listen. It is a time to learn what injustices continue despite progress over years and decades. But it is a time for us as Canadians to recognize that we too have our challenges.
Now, obviously, because he's skilled, when he took his time, the good words came, but you could see the leaking of his anxiety. If he'd been able to just control that, actually a 20-second pause would have worked entirely legitimately within that environment. But how do you learn how to pause? Let me give you some tips. In this deck that I send you afterwards, I'm going to give you a link to a website, which is a game called Articulate. If you go on that website, you will see a card that has 6 categories on. And what I get my clients to do is literally practice describing the words that are on the card, because that's what you do every day at meetings and in interviews. You're describing things, you're thinking on the spot. And if you can describe the words on those cards without going without going without going so, without going right, those sorts of filler words, then as you're hearing me do right now, you can find more fluidity in your communication. I'm employing pause instead of using hesitation sounds. And that pause gives me control and allows me time to think ahead. And so number one tool in establishing credibility in an online and a face-to-face environment is to practice pausing. The second suggestion that I want to make, and the next deliberate action, is another verbal action, and that is around something called staying on the line. And my advice is to make the last word in your thought as strong as the first word in your thought. Now, in English, we make our point at the end of the sentence. The problem is, in terms of verbal delivery, the most common habit is to lose pitch or to lose volume at the end of the sentence or thought. And so you start a sentence quite strongly, but as you get towards the end of the sentence, the voice kind of just begins to fade away. And particularly if you're suffering from imposter syndrome, or you're feeling that you're not sure about what you're saying, somewhere halfway through the sentence, you're 1,200 to 1,400 words going, why are you saying this? And the voice starts to kind of fade away. Most common reason why the voice fades away at the end of a sentence is just simply because our brain starts to think about what we're going to say next before we've actually finished articulating the thought that we're on. Now, of course, the challenge is that you don't finish sentences with if, but, when, the, and is. You finish with your key message. So if you want to enhance your impact, and if you want to land your messages, start to pay attention to how you're saying your sentences, and particularly the words to pay most attention to are the words that come at the end of the sentence. And as I'm communicating to you right the way through this session, I'm going to stay on the line. My voice isn't going to fade away at the end of the sentence to ensure that I'm making my point and that the point lands. The next verbal deliberate action that I'm going to suggest that you take is something called squeezing the juice. Squeeze the juice out the words and make your words sound like they mean. Now, this is based on the fact that all of us have intonation patterns. And when we communicate unconsciously, what happens is we stress words at regular intervals within a sentence. So if we were to give a value to our stresses, some words would be worth 10 pence and other words would be worth 5 pence. But the truth is that you know as teachers is that some words are worth £1 and other words are worth £5 and other words are worth £10. And my voice coaching colleague talks about words, Sarah, talks about words as containing juice. And if you squeeze the juice out of the words that you're communicating, that can add real impact to your online communications and your face-to-face communications. And how you do that is to really pay attention to what it is that you're saying and to recognize that you can make a word sound like it means. And so, for example, you do it on words that are the intensifiers in the sentence. So this is really important. This is very, very crucial. Use those words to really add impact to your communication. And right the way through this session again today on keywords, that's what I'm doing, is I'm squeezing the juice out of the words to basically ensure that as you're listening to me right now, you don't have to do any work to be able to process what I'm saying, because I'm doing the work for you with my voice. And what's really interesting is I was tuned in just before I came online, and I was listening to Jan, who was delivering her session, and she was really squeezing the juice out of her words, whether that was conscious or unconscious. She deliberately used those keywords and helped me to be able to easily follow the point that she wanted to make. The next deliberate action that I'm going to look at are deliberate actions around physicality in an online environment. And physicality in an online environment doesn't just include your own physicality, it also includes the background. Now, we have all been adjusting to working in this online environment. And what I'd like to start with is I'd like to share with you the implications of working in an online environment. I'd like to share with you how the background in an online meeting can sometimes very much come to the foreground and cause some implications into an online meeting. So I'm going to share that with you now. Another little video of a background that became a foreground.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year.
Now, I'm sure that many of you saw that video when it came out. It did go viral. That video was created the interview happened in 2017. And I think that we all know as a result of the pandemic that probably wouldn't happen in 2020. With the understanding that we have now that we're all working within a home environment, the acceptance of those given circumstances, likely that reporter would have taken the lad who's coming in and just put him on his knee and continued with the interview. And that would be the best practice, is that, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. None of us realized that we would be working within this home environment. But to understand that your background does create an impact in terms of how you're perceived. So as you can see, my background is fairly neutral, and that's really deliberate, is because essentially I've made the decision that I don't want you playing through the keyhole into my home, because I want you focusing on the message that I'm delivering and how I'm delivering that message. And the only thing really that I would say about backgrounds is just make sure that they're deliberate rather than unconscious. So for example, if you're being unconscious, you might have a lot of clutter in your background, or you might have your washing in your background. Whereas if you're deliberate, you'll look at your background, you'll turn your camera on before anybody else comes in and go, am I happy with what's in the single lens shot? Because don't forget, it can move. You can make adjustments to that single lens shot. Ensure that your background enhances your impact. Now, again, we weren't all designed to be working from home. And so if necessary, use a virtual background. Virtual backgrounds are really useful if you find that your home environment, that you can't find a background that you feel happy with. If you've got to work in your kitchen and you don't want to share with others you're working with you in your kitchen, use a virtual background. And the truth is, I think in the first couple of months of the pandemic, there was some criticism. You know, why are you using a background? What are you trying to hide? And I read some interesting articles around this. And of course, in terms of inclusion and in terms of diversity, people are working in a wide range of different and living in a wide range of different homes. You know, I was reading about somebody whose father was living in their home and had Alzheimer's and would often wander into a meeting. And so they employed a virtual background in order to ensure that wasn't a disturbance to other people. So be aware about making assumptions about people using virtual backgrounds and recognize that they can be really useful in terms of communication in an online environment. So deliberate action number 5 is find your camera and look at it. And this is all around the idea of eye contact. So January 2020, we were all in the same room. If somebody spoke, you looked at them, and when you spoke, they looked at you. And unfortunately, what a lot of people have tried to do is to recreate that in an online environment. They look at the person who's talking on the screen and believe that that person is seeing them look at them. But what I want to share with you now is a video of Rishi Sunak, you know, in the first month of the pandemic, delivering a really important online message. And I'd like you to look at his camera angle and where it is that he is looking and the impact of that in terms of the communication. So here's Rishi.
I've said very clearly, although we've put unprecedented mitigating actions in place, I certainly won't be able to protect every job and every business. We're already seeing that in the data, and no doubt there will be more hardship to come. This lockdown is having a very significant impact on our economy. We are likely to face a severe recession, the likes of which we haven't seen, and of course that will have an impact on employment.
Now, you know, Rishi Sunak was just learning just like everybody else, and I'm sure his comms team now would have guided him in a different direction. But what it is that you saw was Rishi Sunak was having a conversation on his iPad, and that iPad was vertical on the table in front of him. And when you're looking at an iPad, the camera is down here, but the person you're talking to is over here. So if you look at the person, you're looking away from the camera, and it's the camera that picks up in terms of what he's delivering. We're seeing him in close-up. The other thing, ladies, is if you notice, he's looking down on the camera like this. And in this close-up environment, that can be really disorientating. We don't want to look down on people if we're looking to influence them. And so let me just share with you the little hacks that I've taken in terms of helping me to make eye contact when I'm on screen. So I'm going to move my computer just for a second. So just let you know that the computer screen is going to move. This is my computer screen right in front of me, Okay, it's now on a table right in front of me. Now I'm taking my glasses off so you can see what I'm doing with my eye contact. So this is what would be like if I was talking to my colleagues and I'm talking to this person here on Zoom and I'm talking to this person here on Zoom. And now, because I'm coming closer to the camera, the angle is now looking like I'm looking down on you as I'm having the communication, as opposed to looking directly and making eye contact. So little hacks that I've taken, necessity being the mother of invention again, is that my computer screen is now raised upon 2 cookery books. And now I'm no longer looking at the person in front of me, I'm looking directly at the camera. And it's completely disingenuous, you know, it's completely weird to look at a camera as opposed to the person that we're talking to. But in those scenarios where you do want to effectively influence, this is best practice. So look at the camera as opposed to looking at your stakeholders. A couple of other little reminders is that because you're in close-up, we can see what's happening around your eyes. The truth of the matter is you can't read your text messages and look alert on screen at the same time. You can't read your emails and look alert on the screen at the same time. So if it is an important meeting and you know that you might get distracted by emails or text messages, then switch off those notifications. Because you're in close-up, you could have done it in a face-to-face meeting. In an online environment, it's very difficult to look away from the camera without other people going, oh, what it is that you're looking at. So do remember that you are in close-up when you're looking to influence. So the next deliberate action is around physicality and your own physicality. And we've been communicating with each other now for around about 35 minutes. And this is what you've seen on screen. It may surprise you to know where it is that I'm actually sitting in my chair. Because at this moment in time and throughout my training and throughout this session, I've been sitting right on the edge of my seat. And now I'm going to sit where most people sit, which is back in the seat. And I'm doing that so that you can see literally how far forward in my chair I sit as I'm delivering my messages. And the reason for this is quite simple, is that when I'm sat on the edge of the seat, I can breathe much more effectively. My back ribs are able to open themselves up. So wherever it is that you're sat just now, even if you're sat on the edge of the couch, sat on a couch, I'd like you to bring yourself to the edge of the seat. If you're sat in a chair where there's a table, push the chair back from the table and bring yourself to the edge of the seat. Not so that you feel that you're falling off the chair, but just so that you feel that you're sitting on your sitting bones with a lovely long back. Now you can breathe much more effectively in this scenario. The other advantage is that you can be grounded because in this position, my feet are now flat on the floor. And in those important meetings where the stakes rise, your ability to feel grounded, to feel connected in the floor can give you some real confidence. So the most optimal place to sit in a chair in online communication and in face-to-face communication is actually the edge of the seat. And I'd urge you to have a little practice of this because it can make a real difference in terms of what's perceived on the screen. So rather than pull the chair into the computer screen, push the chair away from the computer screen and bring yourself to the edge of the seat. You will feel more alert, your voice will be clearer, and you will be more present as you communicate your ideas. The final physical impact that I'd like to talk about is based on a quote by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. And he talked about the hand being the visible part of the brain. And my key deliberate action here, deliberate action number 7, is to make sure that your hands can be seen on screen. If you want to create impact in this specific environment, in real life, face-to-face, we use our hands all the time, but we have to be more careful about how we use them in an online environment. So if I start using my hands a lot like this, because I'm in close-up, that's a lot of nonverbal information to take. But if I just gently bring my hands up into the shot, I can gently allow my hands to punctuate my message. And that's because gesture is a form of emphasis. And the truth of the matter is, if you choose not to bring your hands up into the shot and use them below the camera line, this is what happens. You're talking about your ideas, you're presenting them across, but what's happening is we just see the effort in the upper part of the body. And for me, that makes you look a little bit like a thunderbird. And if I'm looking a little bit like Lady Penelope as I'm delivering my messages, that's a bit of a challenge. The other thing is, if you don't use your hands at all, what you'll tend to do is use your head instead. And again, using the head to emphasize is not as effective as just practicing a little bit of bringing your hands into shot. So deliberate action 7, make sure that your hands can be seen as you're communicating. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is to share some strategies when the cameras go off. And a number of you will have experienced cameras off conversation, and you might have been inclined to have a cameras off. And you think Anita mentioned that in the first 2 months that she preferred to have her camera off rather than her camera on as she was delivering the messages. And what I want to share with you is just some thoughts in relation to how you can manage cameras off conversation. The first thing that I would say is, truthfully, if possible, encourage a camera on conversation. We read so much from those non-verbals when you can see the other person. Your ability to effectively influence is far greater when you can see the person that you're talking to and they can see you. So if you can have a camera on conversation, do that. If that isn't possible and you're communicating to people who have got cameras off or your own camera is off, focus on what you can control, which is your voice and your body. Pay attention and sit on the edge of the seat. If it's a camera off conversation, so important to come to the edge of the seat, feet flat on the floor, you will be vocally clearer and they're relying on your voice to make those comments. Keep yourself mentally energized because that will keep your voice energized. And increase emphasis on keywords, even more so than in face-to-face conversation. Really squeeze the juice. And a little tip is that in this online environment, sometimes you need to dial into conversations and you can't see on camera, you can't even see who's in the conversation. If you find yourself having to dial into a conversation, then identify yourself before speaking. Say, this is Cath, and then make your point and encourage the other people in the conversation to say who is communicating, because that can really help in terms of being able to follow a cameras off conversation. The next deliberate action is around death by PowerPoint. Now, as good educators, just like yourselves, I got really excited when lockdown happened because I was like, oh, it's okay, I can still share my PowerPoint. And what I watched was a client who I was working with, and I shared 20 slides with this client, slowly go like this. And actually what I realized is it's really difficult to sustain attention in an online environment when you're looking at a static screen. So in terms of death by PowerPoint, really limit what it is that you share in an online environment, because this is much more interesting than the static screen. If you're a small version talking for 10 minutes around a static slide, you're going to lose the attention of your listeners. So be prepared to switch screens, be prepared to come back to you to discuss the slide that it is that you're talking about. I'm going to finish off by looking at questions and interruptions and dealing with those things within an online environment. And last year at the Women into Leadership Conference, I watched a speech by Permanent Secretary, as she was then, Claire Moriarty. And she made an interesting statistic around gender balance during Q&As. And I wanted to do some research around that and share that with you. And it turns out that the statistics come from an academic environment around gender balance during Q&As. And so this comes from a study, which is 2018 Women's Visibility in Academic Seminars. And the report was about women ask fewer questions than men. And just to give you the 2 key statistics taken from this report that I think are really useful to know, is that women are 2.5 times less likely to ask a question in an academic seminar than men. And if women ask the first question, the Q&A will be balanced. Other women will feel connected and ready to respond. And if men ask the first question, the opposite can often be the case. And so my 9th deliberate action for you is to ask those questions first. Be really deliberate about getting your hand up first, because not only can it encourage other women to speak, it will make the whole conversation potentially far more balanced in terms of the delivery of the message. Now, I'm aware of our time here together today, and so what I'm going to now do is I'm going to move to the final slide, but in this slide deck, there's also some strategies for interjecting that you can review in your own time that are very, very obvious in terms of the delivery of the message. So I'm just going to move to my conclusion and move through this. You can shoot this in your own time and you will have the ability to have that. But let's look at the 9 actions for maximizing your impact online. Pause. Think before you speak. You can say less words to increase impact. Make the last word in your thought as strong as the first word in your thought. And that's how you actually make a point. Squeeze the juice. Find the real meaning in your words to increase emphasis. Check your background and ask yourself, are you happy with what other people are seeing? And if you're happy, absolutely fantastic. Find your camera and look at it, because it will mean that the people who you're talking to will feel like you are looking at them and making eye contact with them. Your physicality affects your vocality. The best place for you to sit is at the edge of your seat to enhance your impact on screen, but also to enhance your voice. Make sure that your hands can be seen, bring them into shot, because it will really help to increase non-verbals and also help to add impact to your communication. Avoid death by PowerPoint. Limit how many slides you show. It will really help, because you are the PowerPoint. That's what it was there to enhance our own verbal delivery. Focus on your delivery. And finally, ask questions first and identify any of your interruptions. And those interruptions could be derailing or they could be helpful. And if they're helpful, respond to them. And if they're derailing in the PowerPoint, there are some strategies in order to manage that. So I'd like to thank you for listening to this session. And I'm very, very excited to answer any questions that you might have about communicating in either an online environment or a face-to-face environment, or anything else that this presentation has thrown up for you. Hey there, Anita.
Hello, thank you. And wow, it's very hard to follow you after this, because now I can see that people, is she looking at the camera? Is she sitting at the edge of her seat? So a real challenge. I use a biscuit tin to lift up my
oh, fabulous.
And depending on what room I'm in, I use a different camera lens. And again, it was something I was taught that can widen the room so you get your hands. So today, because I'm sitting down predominantly, I've actually used a different, because it's a long day. But amazing tips. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, lots to take back. So we have got some questions. I think we've had lots of compliments as well. So Sarah, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Sarah Whittle, forgive me, really some excellent comments. So they've thanked you for that. We've had Grace come on and also say that she has used the squeeze technique in sales and it works. So just the encouragement there that, you know, folks, this is someone who's tried it in their professional context. So, you know, sometimes being in a meeting is like selling, because we're selling our point. I think Harriet's confirmed about asking the questions. We've got someone saying, I find sometimes men do not always follow meeting rules. So jump in to get the point across. I think we've got and we've got Chrissy Allen saying this is the first time she's hearing these messages, and in our current climate, so useful to apply and share with others. So I think you've gained a lot of people going thumbs up. This is really good. There was one question about the virtual backgrounds, but you've answered that. So,
what I'm curious about, I wonder whether or not somebody like myself and yourself, when you've done a lot of it, it makes you look like, you know, you're cool and you've got the expertise, right? Okay. But honestly, what I want to share with you is where I am in my house. I want to let you see backstage, because you can only see the world through this kind of little lens. And if you actually saw where I'm sitting, you would know why it is I'm able to look at the camera the entire time, because of how I've set up this seminar. So I'm going to just show a little bit of my background so that it gives you a little bit more of a context, the fuller picture of how I've delivered the seminar today. And it might give you a few more little bits of information. So apologies, I'm going to move the camera, so just be prepared for that. Okay, so here is the chair that normally sits where I'm currently sitting, okay? And that is my kitchen, which has the very, very big window that causes me a lot of light pollution. And actually, I think in there you can also maybe just see my washing. There is the obligatory bookshelf, but unfortunately has got too much light beside it. And hopefully now what you're realizing, everybody, is that I'm in my hall and there are my stairs. And now you can see the PowerPoint that I've been delivering, which is over the top of my computer. And there is Rick Stein's Spain book and the 2 cookery books that my computer screen's been on, and everything else that is slightly hidden behind that I don't want to be distracted by. So these are the steps I've had to take in order to give you the idea that this is a professional environment when I'm in my hall.
mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I think that you don't necessarily have to work where you present. I think that there's nothing wrong with getting some cookbooks to put your computer screen up, because it will help the other person to be able to look at you. And any of these little hacks can be so useful in terms of being able to create more impact. I've printed off my PowerPoint because I can't look at the screen and look at you at the same time. And so that's enabled me to just slightly look up and then know what I'm going to say next. Because I can't speak for 40 minutes and remember all of that information. I've got to be able to see it in front of me. So there's a little bit of a sense of how it is that I've managed to achieve these objectives.
And I think you've got Harriet concurring. Harriet was one of our earlier speakers. She stuck her notes on her screen. I have a whiteboard above my thing, but I haven't used it today, but I think because it's just gone up. So yeah, great idea. People have said they use their iPad for notes as well for their slides. Yeah. So there are just a couple of questions that have come in. There's a really interesting one on lighting. So what would you advise on lighting, and how do you manage looking at the camera and reading cues? I think you've talked about the cues from people in the gallery view. And then on that lighting, can we just stretch that question, particularly in a meeting where the lighting changes? When I started this meeting, I had a side lamp on. I've switched that off, but you can see that now as we're getting into midday, the light is now flooding through the window. So any thoughts on lighting?
I think, again, it's just about in advance, when you recognize that something is going to change, is that I would take the steps in advance to be able to become aware of that. So as you can see, I don't know if I show you, but just here, there is a large light that I've gone and placed in order to give me more light, because I'm in the corner of a room that has no windows. But I've done it because the windows would have affected my online presence. I have invested in a round light that you can put a phone into that gives you more light in the face. But here's truthfully, Anita, yeah, exactly. But you try and use that with glasses on. What you end up is 2 round circles. So I bought one of those in advance for doing these meetings and realized I can't do it and read the PowerPoint and keep my glasses on at the same time. So I had to ditch it and just invest in like 150 watt bulbs or whatever it is above my head to try and create as much light as possible. So ideally, if the backlighting is coming in, if there's a curtain or something, and then you can increase light in the space that you've got, or indeed, as you just identified, invest in one of those small lights that will give you more light, because it can be a challenge in terms of the online delivery.
Yeah, and I use mine on and off, to be honest with you. It's not all the time.
No.
Do you have any tips for how to encourage others to change their background, camera angle, etc., when they are not aware of how they look or how it looks to others?
I'm remembering watching a senior colleague in a higher education institute who was meant to be, in theory, the most senior member of the team, kind of doing his online messages like this and looking very much away from camera. And I think that I would encourage to perhaps do a training session, is that as an organization, suggest to do a training session about what is optimal in delivery. And that is not a shameless plug for the work that I've just done or me doing that. But there are YouTube videos out there that you can share just simply about camera angles, what is best practice in terms of being able to deliver messages within the online environment. And so what I would do is encourage a conversation about how to suggest training that everybody attends about communicating within an online environment.
Yeah, no, really good top tip. I mean, one of the good things about Zoom is you can actually have a meeting with yourself and you can test it out. So I often, before I'm going on and I'm leading, I will test it out and record it and then play it back just to check lighting and stuff like that. So
Absolutely.
again, just use Zoom to set up a meeting with yourself, record it before you go live.
And in truth, Anita, you know, that video I shared earlier on of Rishi Sunak, that's all he needed to do.
Yeah.
Because if he'd have just done 1 minute of chat, he would have realized how he was being perceived by the viewer. And so absolutely a little bit of time, and I did it today. I must have, you know, recorded myself a good couple of times in different positions, just making sure that what I was going to deliver would be clear for you guys.